If you think Katniss had it rough, Johanna's story is brutal.
Johanna, you are angry.
I'm getting totally screwed over here.
What really happened to Johanna Mason? Why was she targeted by Snow? And how did she go from a normal District 7 kid to a jaded victor in favor of a capital Hunger Games? This is all based on book canon, and I'll highlight some important differences in the films. Heads up, in this video, I'm getting into the sensitive topics of substance abuse and victors being sold, so if you gotta click away, that's totally fine. Johanna is the first victor not from District 12 mentioned by name in the Hunger Games series. It's in chapter 3 of the first book. Katniss is thinking about her strategy for winning the games and wondering if Peeta is following her example. Peeta was visibly upset on camera as he walked from the Justice Building to the Capitol train, whereas Katniss made an effort to look completely emotionless and bored. She questions if Peeta is choosing to appear weak and frightened to reassure the other tributes that he is no competition at all, and then come out fighting. This worked very well for a girl, Johanna Mason, from District 7 a few years back. She seemed like such a sniveling, cowardly fool that no one bothered about her until there were only a handful of contestants left. It turned out she could kill viciously. Pretty clever the way she played it. This is the only snippet we get about Johanna until we meet her in Catching Fire, but it tells us a lot about her, or at least the victor edit she received from the Capitol. As we know, the story of what happens in the games can be heavily altered to portray certain narratives. Still though, let's take Katniss's perception here at face value for a moment. This shows Johanna is not only a skilled fighter, but also especially clever and capable of putting on an act. It sounds like for her interview and all during training with the other tributes, she put on a weak persona which effectively got the other tributes to leave her alone for the majority of the games, so she could hide out while her opponents dwindled. Sorry, but I have to read what Katniss thought after she made those initial remarks about Johanna's games. But this seems an odd strategy for Peeta Mellark because he's a baker's son. All those years of having enough to eat and hauling bread trays around have made him broad-shouldered and strong. It will take an awful lot of weeping to convince anyone to overlook him. Like, sure, Katniss, I know you're commenting that Peeta is a visibly strong tribute, but you're also revealing you have a crush on this guy. Nobody would be able to overlook his strong build. Just admit you like checking out Peeta's jacked shoulders and be done with it. I know you watched his wrestling matches. Anyways, Johanna's weakling strategy is brought up 2 more times in Catching Fire. Seems like Suzanne really wants us to know this. In chapter 14, Katniss notes she won a few years back by pretending to be a weakling, and in chapter 15, she won by very convincingly portraying herself as weak and helpless so that she would be ignored. Then she demonstrated a wicked ability to murder. Katniss is low-key obsessed with the way Johanna pulled off this bait and switch thing. And I think a large part of it is because Katniss knows she could never pull that off. She's not a strong actor. I think Katniss feels both jealous and threatened by Johanna because of this. Book Johanna and movie Johanna behave pretty differently pre-arena. In the movie, she's rude to Katniss from the jump and yelling obscenities during her interview. But in the book, Johanna's more calculated and restrained, manipulating the people around her like she did in her games. She does a whole mean girl routine with Katniss in the elevator, initially complimenting Katniss's various outfits on tour, while also implying she's been watching her closely. And then after the girl talk, she takes off all her clothes, except her shoes, and chats with Peeta about his paintings as if nothing weird is going on. He doesn't unzip her outfit in the book, by the way. She does it herself. Yes, there's the hazing element where the victors are messing with Katniss because of her prudishness, but Johanna's also making a power move here, purposely making her uncomfortable by getting naked, and then is all friendly with her fiance. Johanna's demonstrating her unpredictability here too, which Katniss would see as a threat. Katniss needs to be able to anticipate her enemy's next move in the arena. Never let them know your next move. There was a lot more going on in this elevator than just like a little prank, and I have a whole video about the scene if you want to dive deeper. Another significant book-movie difference was Johanna's interview. Her exact dialogue wasn't in the book. She's asking if something can't be done about the situation. Surely the creators of the Quarter Quell never anticipated such love forming between the victors and the Capitol. No one could be so cruel as to sever such a deep bond. She's being pretty calm and agreeable while still pushing for the games to be called off. In the movie, however, she's super harsh and angry. Her rant is pretty iconic though.
Right there.
So good. As far as the weapons Johanna used during her games, it doesn't seem like she was using an axe. In the Quarter Quell arena, at first Katniss is surprised when she sees Johanna pick up some axes from the cornucopia, but then she sees her skills and makes the connection to District 7's industry, guessing that she's been tossing around axes since she could toddle. I know in the movie, Johanna makes a comment in the elevator about wanting to put an axe in her stylist's face and practices with axes during training, but these are exclusive to the movie. In the book, Katniss just notices Johanna practicing wrestling while completely nude. So Katniss wasn't aware of her axe skills. Since District 7's exports are lumber and paper products, in addition to being skilled wielding an axe, Johanna most likely was an exceptional tree climber. My guess is she spent most of the time hiding in trees and spying on other tributes so she'd know their weak spots when the time came to strike. What do you think Johanna was up to during her games? Let me know in the comments. I can't help but wonder where Johanna's acting chops came from. I mean, it sounds like she could believably fake cry. Sure, she could be naturally good at lying, but I'm wondering if her upbringing has parallels to Peta's, where he had a physically and verbally abusive mother. Peta was great at performing for the cameras too, and notably, children who grow up with abusive parents commonly learn how to lie and manipulate in order to survive. It's possible Johanna had a similar experience, which helped her deceive everyone during her games. Johanna's family is a bit of a mystery. We just know there's no one left that she loves by the 75th games. This could mean her whole family and any close friends or partners are dead, or maybe she doesn't love her family who's still alive, or never had a known family to begin with. Johanna could have grown up in one of the community homes as an orphan for all we know. I gotta address a movie-only line here where Johanna's yelling in the arena saying,
"What if we set your backyard on fire?"
as in President Snow. This line could imply that Johanna's home was literally set on fire as some sort of punishment. But since this line isn't in the books, and I go by book canon, that line is irrelevant. Also, I just noticed this. Why in the movie does Johanna have smoky eyeshadow on in the arena? I know she could have gone into the games wearing it, but it's still there after she's been drenched in blood rain and then after she washes it all off in the ocean. Make it make sense. Did she grab some ashes from a fire and purposely put it on her eyes because she wanted to look cool? I don't get it. Like Katniss, Johanna is the only living female victor in her district at the time of the Quarter Quell. She's probably the closest in age to Katniss and Peta at 21 years old, according to an interview Collins did for Time magazine. It's a real interview, referenced here. I'll link it in the description. In the books, we're not given Johanna's exact age or which year she won, aside from it being a few years before the 74th. I know in one of the movie campaigns, the Capital Couture thing, they list Johanna as being a victor at 17 in the 71st games, but it's not book canon. So what happened to Johanna's loved ones? It's implied in Mockingjay and then fully confirmed in another Time article Suzanne did that Johanna was trafficked as a victor. After Finnick had made his whole propo about being sold by Snow, Haymitch told Katniss that he was the person to hold up to the young Finnicks and Johannas and Cashmere's of what could happen to a victor who caused problems, since his family and his girl were all dead 2 weeks after he won his games, implying that Johanna was one of the desirable victors for selling. In this article, when Suzanne is discussing Finnick and Johanna, she said, "They've been prostituted by the Capitol. If they try and resist in any manner, they're punished by people they love being killed or tormented in some way. So they've both developed these kind of personas, which are their Capitol personas, which is all Katniss has ever seen of them." I take this to mean Johanna did comply at some point with the selling situation, but then something must have happened and her loved ones were killed. There's a variety of ways this could have gone. It's all pretty dark. We know she lost everyone in the end, but it's possible a portion of them were killed off because of what she did during her games. She could have done something rebellious that we don't know about, or perhaps her weakling act was seen as an act of rebellion by Snow, since she tricked the game makers. The game makers heavily control the outcome of the games. They can set mutts and traps on certain tributes to better the odds of their ideal victor candidates. Johanna was ignored by them since they figured she would be easily picked off by another tribute once it came down to the remaining few. She was probably given very little airtime throughout the games, and then all of a sudden, this tribute, who the country had basically forgotten about since she wasn't featured, bursts into the spotlight and wipes out the kids the Capitol most wanted to win that year for whatever political reason. Johanna stole the show. She wrecked whatever narrative they were pushing. If this was a normal TV show, it's definitely an exciting finale, but the game makers weren't just producing entertainment. They were making what they saw as essential political propaganda. Yes, Johanna could have gotten up to all sorts of other rebel shenanigans shenanigans in her games that Katniss just never learned about due to editing, but I can totally see her being in trouble for her surprise attack strategy. Regardless, if her loved ones were targeted for her behavior during the games, Snow didn't kill them all. Suzanne said Johanna was in the trafficking system. That was punishment in itself. We're never told what she went through with all of that, but here's the scenario I imagine. I see it as Johanna was sold for the first time and she complied to keep her loved ones safe. Maybe this happened a couple of times and then she was put in an extra horrible situation. So she's with these evil buyers, she starts resisting, physically fights them off, and it ends with the buyers getting some major injuries, which they completely deserve. And because she hurt these monsters, her remaining loved ones were executed, but she was no longer sold going forward. It's possible she killed these buyers, but in my opinion, Johanna would have been executed or made into an Avox if that happened. But what's your take on this? It's a heavy, serious topic, so just be mindful of that if you choose to comment about it. Moving on. Going into the Quell, Johanna had nothing left to lose except her own life, and she was committed to the rebel movement. The plan to break out of the arena was put in motion from the moment the Quell was announced, which is 3 months before the actual games. Johanna was given some information on what was happening through this underground rebel group. She and the other rebel victor tributes agreed to die to keep Katniss and Peeta alive. Since Johanna was her district's only female victor, she was automatically going into the games. But even if there'd been another choice, it seems like Snow would have made sure Johanna was the one going into the arena. It's pretty clear this quarter Quell's reapings were super rigged to target problematic victors. It appears that the rebels told Johanna she needed to protect Wyrus and Beetee in the arena. Neither of them were fighters, and Beetee was vital to the rebel plan. He was in charge of blowing a hole in the force field. Plus, since Katniss had told Haymitch she was open to being allies with Beetee and Wyrus, then Johanna could use them as her in, since Katniss really didn't want anything to do with Johanna. When they first encountered each other in the arena, Katniss was criticizing the way Johanna was treating Wyrus, and then Johanna slapped her in the face so hard it made her see stars. Johanna had to really have cared about the revolution as a whole because she clearly did not like Katniss as a person, at least at this point. Johanna also deserves major credit for getting Katniss out of the arena. She knocked Katniss out, cut out her tracker, and led the careers hunting them away from her. She truly laid down her life for Katniss and ended up being captured and tortured because she was distracting the careers instead of cutting out her own tracker. And Johanna's experience in the Capitol is absolutely horrifying, and she was there for roughly 6 weeks. And by the time she was rescued, she was emaciated, her hair was all shaved off, and she was covered in bruises and wounds. In the Capitol, Johanna was soaked in water and then given painful electric shocks. I think this is a little tie-in to George Orwell's 1984, because people were also shocked in that book, and Suzanne is a big Orwell fan. From this experience, Johanna developed a huge aversion to water. She avoided showers, and when she was training to be a soldier in District 13, she was given a combat test simulation where they flooded the streets and she had some kind of flashback. Panicked, didn't know where she was, and had to be sedated, failing this test. Really, really sad. Johanna always projected a hard persona to conceal her inner pain, but there were definite cracks in this facade after what she endured as a prisoner. She still made plenty of verbal jabs at Katniss and made seemingly irreverent remarks like how she and Peeta were very familiar with each other's screams, but her episode during training and her burgeoning addiction to morphling gives us a window into her suffering. Morphling is used as a calming, sedative medication, but it's primarily intended to be a painkiller. When she was in 13, she said that the morphling addicts from District 6 may have been on to something. Drug yourself out and paint flowers on your body. Not such a bad life. Seemed happier than the rest of us anyway. I really don't blame her for wanting to be numb and disconnected from reality after all that she went through. In 13, she was given some talk therapy, but Johanna didn't seem to find it helpful. She thought her head doctor was a clueless idiot. If she was put on any psychiatric medications, it wasn't mentioned, though it seems likely because Katniss was put on them when she was in 13. Johanna does seem like the type to hide her meds under her tongue and spit them out when no one's looking, you know? A common theory in the fandom is that Johanna was a failed Mockingjay, like the rebels tried to use her as a symbol to rally behind based on her epic comeback in the games, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. I think this theory mainly comes from Johanna's proximity to Katniss in age and a conversation they have in Mockingjay. Johanna admits that she is jealous of Katniss because of how much everyone values her. It's everybody's job to keep Katniss alive. I imagine it felt much different for Johanna when she was told to lay down her life to keep Katniss alive in the arena than it was for the older tributes like Mags and Beetee. Johanna was just 4 years older than Katniss. It'd be easy to imagine herself as being in Katniss's place and be this all-important treasured person to the majority of the country. When Katniss said to Johanna, "You should have been the Mockingjay. No one would have had to feed you lines." Johanna agrees. She says, "True, but no one likes me." Ouch. I'm going deep into my own speculative theory here, by the way. These details aren't in the book whatsoever, but being from a non-career district, Johanna's ruthlessness in the games probably was pretty unpopular. On her post-games victory tour, the Capitol would have tried to shape her image to make her more palatable, maybe playing into her confidence and intelligence, but the whole country knew Johanna as a liar. Any attempt she made to play the gracious, poised victor on tour could have been disregarded by the crowd since she'd already fooled them. The real Johanna would be perceived as the tough fighter she was at the end of the games. Being branded as the deceitful manipulator would make it nearly impossible to get an audience on her side. People were afraid of her, so Johanna needed to embody the tough, heartless persona the public already believed her to have. I'm sure she already had elements of this in her real personality, but she played them up as a victor, and her personal identity morphed into that public persona, especially since it started when she was still a teenager. Like Finnick, the line is pretty blurry between his public image as the swaggering, suave heartthrob and his true personality. Having to put on an act at a developmental age while enduring major trauma and living under constant threat of an authoritarian regime is beyond complicated. Johanna desperately wanted to fight in the war, and she trained to be a soldier alongside Katniss. This was all left out of the movies, so to recap, Coin wasn't going to allow Katniss and Johanna to go into combat in the Capitol at all, but they got her to agree to let them train and then be reevaluated. The two of them became much more friendly during this time. Katniss thought of them as allies. They helped each other during training. Johanna was going through morphling withdrawals, and Katniss was recovering from various injuries. I love this one line from Johanna. "You can do it. We both can. We're victors, remember? We're the ones who can survive anything they throw at us." They were both living in the hospital at first, and then became roommates in a normal compartment. Johanna initially wasn't going to be allowed to move out of the hospital since doctors wouldn't let her live alone due to her instability. Katniss could have moved back in with her mother and Prim, but instead she declares out of nowhere that she will room with Johanna, and from then on, they're roommates. And they were roommates. Johanna never says this, but I think it meant a lot to her that Katniss stuck up for her like this. Nobody had asked Katniss to do this. It was all her own idea. Reminder, Johanna had no loved ones, and any of the remaining personal belongings she had were in District 7. There's this moment when they're first living together that breaks my heart. Johanna opens Katniss's drawer that's holding her few possessions, the parachute, locket, spile, and pearl, and she immediately shuts it and apologizes. It's very much, oops, sorry. The way she's showing this respect for Katniss's privacy, and the way she's almost embarrassed for accidentally looking at Katniss's things, I think it really shows how empty and alone Johanna felt. And Katniss recognizes this, so she tells Johanna she can look at her stuff if she wants to, and Johanna does. It's a really tender moment. Later on, Katniss gathers some pine needles above ground, and she wraps them up, making an apple-sized bundle, and gives it to Johanna so she'll have something to put in her drawer. And this makes Johanna tear up, and she says it smells like home. It makes me so sad. Not me crying over this, I'm not. There's also a symbolic element with trees and Johanna. When Katniss presented her with these pine needles, she said, "Remember when we met? You were a tree." Well, briefly, calling back to that time in the elevator where Johanna was literally dressed up as a tree. And trees tend to symbolize resilience, which makes a lot of sense with Johanna. Specifically, we're talking about pine needles, so an evergreen tree also rhymes with Everdeen. But evergreen trees, they're strong, they're survivors. They keep their leaves, their needles year round. And I think that makes a lot of sense with Johanna's character, especially since she does survive to the end of the war. She's one of the few victors left. And I hope this means that Johanna really does end up okay, because she has roots. She can stay with her feet on the ground and not go adrift, getting high on the morphling. Ultimately, Johanna fails training to be a soldier because she has that episode with the flashbacks, and she stays behind while Katniss and Finnick go off to the Capitol. Before Katniss left, Johanna made her swear on her family's life that she will kill Snow. If she'd gone into combat and survived, she may have ended up voting against the games with the Capitol children. Maybe her bloodlust would have been quenched, and seeing Snow get executed would be enough for her. I wonder how Johanna felt about what ended up happening during the execution, with Katniss opting to kill Coin instead of Snow. I think she would have found Snow choking and being crushed by the crowd more satisfying than a quick arrow shot, but who knows? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The last time we see Johanna in the series is at that vote for the Capitol Games. Her final line of dialogue was in response to Annie saying that Finnick would have voted no if he was there, and Johanna says, "But he isn't, because Snow's mutts killed him. It's an angry, resentful note to end on. And for the record, Joanna's first lines of dialogue were, "Isn't my costume awful? My stylist's the biggest idiot in the Capitol. Our tributes have been trees for 40 years under her. Wish I'd gotten Cinna. You look fantastic." That's her intro. It's not said if she moved back to District 7 or went somewhere else, nor if she went back to self-medicating with Morphling or found a healthier way to cope. It seems like she still thought of 7 as her home based on her reaction to the pine needles, so I believe she returned. Joanna had probably actively avoided forming any close relationships as a victor since anyone connected to her would be put in danger. But hopefully post-war, she felt safe enough to form connections with others and stayed in contact with Katniss and Peeta. It makes sense that Overlord Suzanne Collins didn't wrap up Joanna's story with a tidy little bow. Joanna was finally free from Snow, so the rest of her story was in her own hands. That's about it, folks. I would love to know your thoughts and theories on Joanna, so please share them in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more Hunger Games analyses and do the thumbs up thing.